Welcome to Uncle Jimmy's podcast. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the conversation.
What do you both think about fear?
I'm not in this world to live up to your expectations. I'm here to live up to mine.
He who is not courageous enough to take risks will accomplish nothing in life.
Fear is a teacher.
And I don't skip class.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome into Uncle Jimmy's podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, warriors of justice and champions of the human spirit, please rise and give a thunderous welcome to a woman who doesn't just speak truth to power. She carries the fire of her ancestors in her bones and lights the path for every Indigenous woman still fighting to be seen, heard, and protected. Shawna J Serniak, proud Métis daughter, fierce founder of the Every Woman Empowered Endowment Fund, international speaker, diversity liaison for Canada's Building Trades Union, an unapologetic voice for the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, stands before us today, not as a survivor of history, but as a builder of its next chapter. From Edmonton streets to the Canadian Embassy in Tokyo, from the medicine wheel teachings to the 7 sacred teachings she shares with boardrooms and broken hearts alike, Shawna has turned personal pain into public power, grief into grants that fund searches, memorials, education, and healing. She didn't wait for permission. She didn't ask for a seat at the table. She built her own and then pulled every silent sister up beside her. This is not just an introduction. This is a standing ovation in words. Shawna J Serniak, the floor is yours. How are you today?
Oh, thank you, Uncle Jimmy. Thank you for having me. It's been a joy to be on here. Thank you.
I love it. And the conversation we had before, it's such touching. And we had talked, right? And I tell my listeners all the time, this is one, everybody knows if you listen to the podcast, I have a way of doing things. And Shawna's story is powerful and there's so much to it. So buckle in, sit back. We're going to get into some ways where we can help out Indigenous people, where we can spread the word, where we can get materials out, where we can send people to help, to donate. And it's going to be powerful. So Shawna, you carry Métis blood, right? And the weight of every missing sister on your shoulders. What was the exact moment the fire inside you became unstoppable?
Here in Canada, we had a serial killer in BC. And I won't mention his name, but he was a pig farmer. And what happened was women were going missing on a highway, a major highway in BC. And women were going missing all the time. Eventually, what we found out is that this pig farmer had taken these women, murdered them, and then fed them to the pigs. And these were just one or two. There were too many women out there. And what happened was these women weren't really truly recognized for who they were because maybe they had a drug addiction. Maybe they were working the streets. And for some reason, because you have a drug addiction or you're working the streets, your value becomes less. But what we forget is that these women were somebody's sister, somebody's mother, daughter, aunt, cousin, friend. These were human beings. And when we found out the tragedy of this, it just hit my heart so much, and the injustice of it, and the way that eventually through time, it just became a story. And nothing was truly looked into it. No justice was truly done for these women. And at that point in time, it just impacted me that I knew that even though I have never experienced this, even though I didn't have a loved one that is murdered and or missing, I knew that something had to be done for the justice of the Indigenous woman. Before colonization, the Indigenous woman was very much held to high self-esteem. She was the decision maker. She was the one that took care of her tribe with decisions. While the men were hunting and providing, the women were the ones that were making all the decisions. They were the childbearers. They were held in such high regard that once colonization came and the white man came, they devalued the value of our Indigenous women. They didn't have them speaking at the table. The women were raped. They were murdered. They were treated like a low-class citizen. And right there and then, it just showed how the white man didn't really see our women, see the true, incredible human beings that they were. And so my fight today is to make a difference for the 7 generations before us and learn from them and carry that forward and make a difference for the next 7 generations ahead of us.
Yeah, and you're doing that, Shawna, and I think, right, what you were saying there, and so back before colonization, right, the women were almost the backbone of the community. right?
Absolutely. Yes.
The men are off hunting. They may be gone for a couple days, but here's the woman, right? She's keeping everyone checked. She's keeping everyone fed. She's taking care of the baby. She's having children. So here she is, right? And then colonization happens, and it's almost like you said, they become third-class citizens where they're not respected, they're not treated. Where they're almost right when colonization happened, their light is dimmed, right?
Yes.
They're dimmed, and that's one of the hottest things to think of. So founding the Every Woman Empowered Endowment Fund meant steering straight into the abyss, right, of MMIWG. What was the darkest night that you almost walked away, and what pulled you back in?
I have friends that have lost loved ones, and what gets me the most is here in Canada and, of course, in the United States, there is a huge number of women that have gone missing and or murdered, and justice has not been properly done. And what's crazy about this is that still, to this day, nothing is being properly dealt with. And it's almost like, okay, you could do the marches, you can, fight for the government to hear you, but it's really at the end of the day about the dollar. And so I decided to create this endowment fund that is managed by a great company here that it deals with this in such a way of integrity. So the money that's being raised, it's about bringing that awareness. It's about making sure that we have enough money to do searches and digs for those who are missing and to honor those who are no longer with us so that we can put a stop to this incredible injustice that is going on. And maybe by myself doing this and bringing this awareness and going to the government saying, hey, listen, we have the dollars for this. We're raising the money for this. We're making a difference because you're not doing anything about it. We're going to do something about it. And maybe because of that, somebody will wake up and smell the coffee and go, wait a second. This woman is doing this. Why are we not doing it as a country, as a whole?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so what, Shawna, what frustrates you, right? Say, for instance, you're up there, you're fighting, right? And sometimes, and I said it in the opening, you're putting some of your own money into some of these searches and memorials, right?
Yes.
So what would you say, right, to the politicians out there, not just in Canada, but also in the United States of America, when it comes to funding for this, right? And for my listeners, when I mention MMIWG, it's the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls, because I'm going to use that. You're going to hear it. But so for the people out there, right, the politicians, if they're listening, because I have some politician friends of mine that listen to the show here in the States, and I'm actually going to have one on as well. So what would your message be to them about funding when it comes to this?
I think it's really simple. We need to support, we need to become allies, and we need to join the two countries together as allies to do the justice for the Indigenous people, not just the murder and missing Indigenous women and girls, but as a whole, we need to become allies. And part of that is putting your money where your mouth is. Take action. Donate to charities like, for example, the Every Woman Empowered Endowment Fund. Donate to the cause. Talk about it. Ask questions. Educate yourself. Bring that knowledge. Don't walk around with blinders on and then be surprised when you hear what's going on and the injustices of it. If this was the same scenario with white women going murdered and missing, we would be on top of it, both countries, like there was no tomorrow. But for some reason, because it's Indigenous women, it's just disregarded.
Yeah.
And again, we have to remember, these are human beings.
Yeah. That's the injustice in itself, right?
Yeah.
And I don't know if you're following the story down here in the States, right? We have an 84-year-old woman, Nancy Guthrie, who's missing, right? One woman whose daughter is famous, and she's missing. She's 84 years old. And there is not a news cycle that I haven't turned on that she is on. But what makes her story any different than Indigenous or a black girl down the street? Why? Because she's white, they have money, and that can be all over the news 24/7. Again, if we took all of that and flipped it, right, and looked at every woman, regardless if it's Nancy Guthrie or anybody else, and shined that light so bright, things would be different. And that's one thing I think we need to do. The media, the news, all those news cycles need to stop with the bullshit and focus on things that are really happening in the communities, especially Indigenous young girls going missing.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, I feel like sometimes it's like, it's and I'm not trying to be rude, but you'll hear, oh, they're just Indigenous people. It's okay. Like, you're not looked at like you're real people. It's so friggin', I could swear, frustrating. And I do swear. We can swear on the show because I get frustrated sometimes and I start dropping the F-bombs. But it's so frustrating because history, people need to learn history. Go back and look at, like we were talking before, there was the Six Nations and all that were here. There's so much if you look into it. And it's been an injustice since, we came over from Britain, since that day, and it's never been rectified or fixed. It's always, to me, been swept under the rug. And again, history is history. There's no erasing it. We need to look at it. We need to learn from it, and we need to start doing the right thing.
Yes, and we tend to forget that the Indigenous people were the first peoples. We call them the first peoples. They were the ones that were here. We are guests. We are guests of the Indigenous people.
Yeah.
They opened their arms to us. They welcomed all the people that came. But what happened was the white man got greedy and took and took and took, and then started to segregate, started to manipulate and abuse the Indigenous people. And that's where the injustice started from. How do you go with someone that says, come to my land? Yes, of course you're welcome. There was no boundaries. There were no reservations. It was open land and all were welcomed. And they were a very gracious group of individuals that welcomed. But then something happened. The abuse happened. And you can only say for a certain amount of time, I'm going to take this before you start to retaliate. And it's, we have to keep in mind that it's, they're not Indians. They're not natives. They're Indigenous people. I'm an Indigenous person. Here in Canada, we don't use the word Indian. We don't use any other terminology except Indigenous. Now, if someone wants to use the word Indian, for example, that's their choice. But as someone that is speaking about the Indigenous people, the right terminology is Indigenous, and you use that out of respect and acknowledgement, learning and educating yourself. We are not 20 years ago. We're not 40 years ago. It's time for us to rise and be realistic in how we are addressing the Indigenous people and making sure we give that proper respect to the Indigenous people.
Yeah. And we were talking about that before, about people that throw that word out. And to me, it's Indigenous people. And like you said, they were the original. They were the ones that greeted us. My family came from Ireland and in Poland. But, when we came here as immigrants, we were welcomed, by the Indigenous people, back in the day when we first came, and things that I read about what ended up happening was the 13 colonies were established, and they got so fed up with the colonies that they started expanding out west and going above into, where the Indigenous people were, and they just raped and pillaged the land and took it. And here are people inviting them in saying, hey, let's be allies, right? And there was no allies. It just turned into killing, raping, pillaging the land, the women, all of that. And again, we need to do a deep dive, everybody, on the history of Indigenous people. That's the biggest thing. Whether you're in Canada, whether you're in the States, I've spent some time in Canada. I have a nephew who's up in Vernon now playing hockey. He's up in Vernon playing now. He got traded, but he was up in Vancouver for a bit. And I went up there a few times. I love the people up there. I love everything about it. But it's getting to the root of the cause of the problem, right? And I think it's ignorance, it's miseducation.
Yes.
And people need to educate themselves.
Yeah, you can't. I think one of the biggest things, and we're seeing it, all across the board, is that people will just get one idea in their head and stick with that idea instead of actually proper educating themselves. And it's almost like a really bad social media down the rabbit hole. You go down one thing that says, Indigenous people are this, and this, and it's a negative connotation. And then you can go down this rabbit hole that will say all this negative stuff about Indigenous people. And then you could go on to another rabbit, hole where it's, well, this is, what's actually reality, and go down that. It's about proper educating ourselves and taking that time to learn and ask questions. If someone came up to me and said, like, I have questions, please ask me anything that you want. And it's a safe space, right? Like, you can ask those questions that might be hard for you, that you wouldn't maybe say in public, but you can ask and say, do I have a safe space to ask these questions that are on my heart? And, I very rarely would ever say, someone would say, no, I don't want to talk to you about it. we want to share our culture. We want to share our pride and joy and our traditions and our ways. We want to help educate people to become well aware of the history and the injustices that happen and be properly educated. And I think as human beings, we should not just be doing this just for Indigenous people, but we should be doing it for all. We should be asking questions instead of assuming. As my mom would say, if you assume, you make an ass out of you and me. So,
You and me.
you know, let's get down to it, and let's take this time to join and learn and educate ourselves.
Yeah, and I think it's time to come together, right, and build that alliance, right, and learn to appreciate and love each other for who we are, right,
Exactly.
and learn to love each other for what we came from and where we came from, and it's just so powerful, right? And Shawna, before I get to the next question, can you just let people know that want to educate themselves, right? Where can they go to find some material, some literature that they can read, or even reach out to you if they have some questions?
Yeah, absolutely. There are so many great resources out there. Now, the first one is here in Canada, we have the University of Alberta, which is the province that I'm in. And they actually have a free course on the Indigenous history for Canada that anybody can take. So, what I can do, Jimmy, is I can send you that link. It is phenomenal. We have books like Highway of Tears, a phenomenal book that shares about that highway where these women had gone missing. There's just so many resources out there. You can go onto Facebook under my Every Woman Empowered, and you could go there and on the endowment fund and learn about the endowment fund. You can learn about what are the injustices that are going on and what we are doing about it. Follow me on Instagram, follow me on Facebook, follow me on all the socials, LinkedIn, whatever. I'm there. You have a question, reach out. Like, I would be more than honored to be able to answer questions for people. Reach out to your communities, to your local reservations, talk to elders. Just take that time to properly educate yourself. Here in Canada, we know more about the history of the United States and the Indigenous people than you probably even do in the United States. We were taught that as we were growing up about the injustices and what has transpired. It's something that schools need to be properly educating our history.
Educating, yeah, yeah. In the correct history.
Yes, yes.
Right, because I think sometimes school books, and especially in the States, right, they like to skew things and they like to change stories and narratives when it's really not true, when it's not true. And that's the problem, because as kids, when you're educating these young kids and they're getting this in their head, they're learning, right? And they're young. They may stick with that the rest of their life. But I think again, I did a deep dive into the Six Nations and all that, and how I was because as an American, right, I just thought all of a sudden we came over here, there was some Indigenous people and we started the colonies and it was great. But then I learned the colonies started because of the Indigenous people, of the, travelers coming over here from England and looking and seeing how the Indigenous people lived in the six tribes. They set it up that way. And democracy comes from the six tribes, the Six Nations, right? That people, if you look into it, it's so inspiring, but it's also an injustice because people don't understand where where it came from. Democracy itself was a thing that the Six Nations had going on for themselves.
Well, and it's still going on. So, like, some of the
Yeah.
injustices that are currently going on are lack of water, drinking water on certain reservations, the lack of education for the children. There's also, just it wasn't that long ago where an Indigenous woman was being sterilized without her consent to have not having children. We saw where residential schools where children were taken away as young as 4 years old from their families and being put into residential schools, miles and like hundreds of miles away, hours away, and being raised by abusive nuns and priests who were sexually molesting and abusing them. We saw where, young children were being buried at these residential schools, and then the parents not even finding out till their child doesn't come home, and not getting the answers of what's going on. And I do this analogy that I talk about when I was in New York. My son got us tickets to go see the 9/11 memorial. And normally we were just going to see the memorial. We weren't going to go see the whole museum and such. But my son says, no, you have to go. And I'm getting you special tickets. It's going to be the VIP tickets first thing in the morning before it even opens. You'll get a private tour with 20 other or so people for 9/11. And it was incredible. And there's one portion there. It's this huge wall that's in this area, that behind this wall, they're still currently doing searches through the rubble to try and find any DNA of any of the people that were in that building for 9/11. So here we are over 20-some years later, and they're still doing this search. Millions of dollars are going into it. And I think it was just over a year ago, they were able to identify some DNA to say that, yes, this man was there. So that was in 2001 when 9/11 happened. Just 4 years prior to that, the last residential school closed in Canada, 1997. The last residential school closed. Over 160,000 children went to residential schools here in Canada. We have over 144 residential schools that were across Canada. And we started to do searches because we found bodies on the grounds that were of these children. And we did 11 residential schools. We searched out of the 11, 7 of those schools were found unmarked graves of children that were just buried and discarded. Now, that was, and like I said, the last residential school 4 years prior. Now, we would never in our life say, well, 9/11 was 2001. Get over it. Move on. You would never say that. But we're telling our survivors and the families of children that went to residential school to move on and get over the trauma. These are children between 4 and 16 years of age that were sexually assaulted, were physically abused, were taken away from their parents, were stripped of their culture, were not allowed to speak their language, were abused, starved, and neglected, and they were trying to indoctrinate them to become white people and not savages. Now, how can you say to someone that survived that, get over it? That was, like whatever. You would never. And look at the amount of money that is being put into 9/11 for the search to do justice for those who died on that day. What about the justice of those children that still haven't been found on unmarked graves? They just stopped digging. They stopped searching. We still have over 130 more residential areas where schools were to dig. Like, it
And
just
Shawna, how many kids were missing? Do you know? Do you have a number?
no, because of course the records back then weren't properly dealt with, but
Yeah.
they feel that it's probably closer to maybe 20,000 if possible. Right now it was I think we found already 700 some bodies, unmarked graves. So like, it's just ridiculous. It's ridiculous what's going on. How do we still today hold our heads up and be proud of who we are when we're not even we're not dealing with just the past. We're dealing with it today, the history of
Today,
what's
yeah.
happening right now. This is, like this, something needs to be done.
Current day, exactly. And Shawna, what are the politicians saying to you guys about this? You said there was 130 something residential schools that closed. You guys have found 700 kids, and there's a possibility that there may be 20,000 of them. What are they saying? What are they saying to you guys?
We the government has done a whole truth and reconciliation, and they're supposed to be these calls to action that are things, injustices that have been done, and there's a whole list of all the calls to action. And I'll be honest with you, Jimmy, maybe 7% has been dealt with. Things have just been dropped, have not been. I mean, it's a lot of talk, no action. And it angers the hell out of me. It really does, to see that
And it
going
should,
on.
right? And it should anger anyone out there, right? Any human being that can think, wrap their heads around it. You
Yes.
found 700. There's 20,000 possibly. And again, these were residential schools where kids were sent away to, and now all of a sudden they're closed, and it's like, nope, no more digging, no more searching. It's okay. and it's, come on, and the politicians out there, again, I think the biggest thing, and even here in the States, it's a strict, division right now. And whether you love Donald Trump or you hate him, and I say this all the time, I'm not a fan of Donald Trump, but I believe in democracy. So he is our president, unfortunately, but that's how democracy goes, right? And I tell people I am frustrated with what he is doing and what he isn't doing, but it will sure as hell next election cycle when I have the chance to help out a campaign or help out a candidate, I am going to be there, right? And I'm going to make 25 more calls than I did before. I'm going to make 25 more door knocks than I did before, because that's how we're going to change things. Getting out and about, talking to people, cating them, and doing the right thing, right? I'm just totally miffed at that whole, like you said, the last school closed, and here you are with 20,000 possibly missing, and nobody bats an eye, nobody cares.
No, it's like, well, that was back then, things were different. It doesn't matter. It doesn't
No.
matter. It's about bringing closure and helping those who are still dealing with the trauma of this. Like, could you imagine? Like, I have a son. I'm a single mother. And it was in the 50s and 60s here in Canada, we had what's called the 60 scoop. And it started in the 50s, where if you were a mother that had a child out of wedlock, or, had an Indigenous woman with a child out of wedlock, your child would be taken away from you. And then your child would be put up, a little picture would be put up in the newspaper, and it would be like, this is Jimmy. Jimmy's 4 years old, and he likes trucks, playing with his trucks. And if you want Jimmy, call this number and you can come and you get Jimmy. And with no research into who is going to take Jimmy. And, it could be pedophiles taking Jimmy and
Yeah,
taking them
exactly.
away from their mother.
And the mother had no say.
No, none. And it was
Wow.
called a 60 scoop. And this was going on for how long? So, like, as myself, as a single mother, someone taking away my child, or just as a parent, someone taking my child away from me and taking them to a school that's hundreds of miles away. You're in a horse and wagon up until, when we started having vehicles. But when this first started, they went by horse and wagon. It would be hundreds and hundreds of miles. The children wouldn't see them for over a year. A 4-year-old being taken, and then being subjected to rape and abuse. Like, it's just, these are children, these are people, these are human beings. And that's what just aggravates me, is that we've allowed this to happen, but now it's time to make amends and get the proper care and help those who are going through the trauma, help with the answers of finding if there's any more children out there in these unmarked graves, helping the Indigenous woman so that she can feel safe on the streets to be able to walk and not be the next murdered or missing woman. Just to acknowledge our Indigenous people with pride. There's, like, yes, there's alcoholism. Yes, I'm not saying there isn't. Yes, there's drug abuse. But look what's been going on in the history of the Indigenous people. And you can see why there is addictions, why there is poverty, why there is this, because it's been constant hit over the head with crap. You're constantly
Yeah.
getting hit left, right, and center. When is your time to be able to not have trauma in your life?
Yeah. Yeah, it's like one constant trauma after the next, right?
Yes. And I mean, 1997 wasn't that long ago. The 60s weren't that long ago. Trauma
No.
carries. These were happening to children and women and even our men, and trauma carries. And if you don't have the tools to be able to deal with this, what happens? You slowly become, you're a fraction of what you were.
What you were, yeah. And think of the generational trauma, right, Shawna? That the Indigenous people carry, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
And alcohol was brought to the Indigenous people. They never had alcohol. And it's interesting. I always say this, and people are like, oh, interesting. So, like, the white man had been drinking alcohol for centuries. I mean, like, as long as we know, alcohol's been around with the white man. But when they brought alcohol to the Indigenous people, they never had alcohol. So alcoholism is a very new addiction to the Indigenous people. They
Indigenous
also
people, yeah.
have a lot of it's high diabetes with the Indigenous people because of the sugars that were brought to the Indigenous people. And it's interesting, a lot of Indigenous people smoke, but they don't usually have they don't die usually of uh, lung cancer because they've been traditionally smoking the peace pipe and tobacco is offered. They've had it in their ancestry for years, like, but alcohol is something that's very new to the Indigenous people. So there is, that addiction. There is the diseases of diabetes and, the effects of it. So it's, whereas the white man were like, hey, you bring in some Irish and they're like, oh, we've been making potato rum since, the whatever, you know,
Is exactly.
so yeah, it's just having an understanding of what's been going on and having some sympathy for it, and as well as just educating yourself is huge. And it's not something of the past. It's right now. It's happening now.
So, next question, right? Shawna, you speak about the medicine wheel and the
Mhm.
7 sacred teachings to rooms full of people who have never felt the sting of colonial violence. How do you keep from screaming when they nod politely?
I always, when I talk about this, I always say to people, how many of you have heard this? And they'll put their hands up, and how many were you shocked and like just in dismay when this, occurred, and, the hands go up. And then my next question is, and how many of you took action? And then there's not a hand that goes up.
That goes up, yeah.
And that's when I get angry. Educating yourself and gathering that knowledge, no, of course, I want to be able to provide that for you. I want to be able to help open your mind and your way of thinking. And I'm honored to do so. But when you choose to see what's going on and turn a blind eye and not take any action, that's when I get angry. And that's when yes, yes. And it could be as simply as doing a march. It could be as simply as becoming an ally and speaking to others when they speak poorly of the Indigenous people and saying no, correcting someone in the right terminology. It could be donating to a charity, taking that time to just educate yourself with resources, books, podcasts, the course of the University of Alberta. This is all part of the ally, being an ally, sitting there and just going, well, that's not, that happens. Doesn't affect me. It affects
Yeah.
you. This is your country. This is your United States. This is your Canada. This is your responsibility as someone that's living here today to make a difference so that the next 7 generations have something to work with, to be able to understand and build and grow and make change. And the Indigenous cultures always talks about the number 7 and the 7, sacred teachings
Sacred teachings,
of
yeah.
the 7 generations. What we do today impacts, the next 7 generations, taking that accountability, loving Mother Earth, honoring Mother Earth. As Indigenous people, you're not to litter, you're not to, you value the water, you value nature, you give honor, you know, if you were to go hunting, you give honor to the animal that is going to feed you. You use all the animal parts. You don't just leave the carcass, and just for hunt for sport. You honor everything. And it's really about the Indigenous people have so many beautiful ways and teachings that are so valuable. And when I do these teachings, like I said, from schools to corporate, offices, like I said, I've spoken in the United States, I've spoken in Canada, I've spoken in Japan. It's amazing how many people come up to me afterwards and say, thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that, because it is powerful, and it's just taking a different view on how we get up in the morning, how we act to other people, and just as human beings being more kind and loving and respectful versus what we're seeing too much of, and being positive versus negative.
Yeah. Yeah, and we're seeing too much negativity and too much hatred in the world today, whether it's in Canada, whether it's in the States, or worldwide, right? This is too
Yes,
much.
yes,
I like to say this, right, Shawna? We're all in this together.
yes,
We're all in this together, and we need to
absolutely.
stop picking each other up. We need to start positive affirmations. We need to start loving each other, because it will make the world a better place for all of us, right?
Exactly. Exactly. We focus too much on the negative. We
Exactly.
focus too much on assumption, and we need to, like I said, just take that time to be positive and be an ally to not just Indigenous people, but to all, and be respectful of our Mother Earth and respect each other as human beings.
Yeah. So next question, right? As diversity liaison for Canada's building trades union, you walk into spaces built by men, basically for men, in a country that still buries Indigenous women. What systemic rot have you exposed that made even allies uncomfortable?
I think, again, we come down to lack of education or lack of taking that time to realize, we're all as one. I think the biggest thing that I saw is that women are really rising in the trades.
No doubt about it.
Here in Canada, we're seeing a huge influx of people leaving the trades. They're retiring. They've come to that retirement age, and we're not getting that new influx of people coming into the trades. And so my job was really about, making sure that people were hiring people of diversity. So, not just men, but people with disability, Indigenous people, newcomers, the LGBTQ community, women, and being aware that things need to change on the sites. So, you can't just have a porta potty for just men anymore. You need to think about porta potties for women and their needs, that accompany that. If someone is disabled, doesn't mean that they still can't do the job. It just means that you might have to accommodate a few things for it. And if somebody is of the LGBT community, you work alongside as support systems to each other, not against each other. It's a lot of times it's the lack of knowledge or uncomfortability that we're seeing, and you just have to be more broad-minded. And it's amazing the change is coming. It's there here, at least in Canada, I have to say. It's a slow process. You're still going to get those that are very much, the rednecks that are like, this is, a man's job. Well,
Back in their ways, right?
yeah, and that's fine if you think that, but there are some really incredibly qualified people of the diversity aspect that can do the job as well.
Yeah.
And we just
Yeah.
have to be a little bit more open-minded and willing to, again, learn, help those that are coming new into the industry. Because if we don't start opening ourselves to it, we're going to, as someone that might be an employer, you're going to lose. You're going to lose out. You're going to lose out on some really qualified people, incredible people, and we need diversity right across the board.
Yeah, and Shawna, I love it that, the steps that, up in Canada that they're taking, it seems to me that they're trying to include everybody.
Yes.
Right? Everybody's welcome. And that, as a union guy myself, it's always one of those. And I sit in on the interview and hiring process. And I often say it, right? And I say it to, sometimes the bosses are there when we're doing the interviews. And I say, what did you think about her or him? And I said, look, I don't see him or her. I say, can they do the job? Right?
Exactly.
And that's how I look at it. And I'm taking the best candidate that can do the job for the job, right? And again, it's encompassing everyone. And I love to hear that it's going on up there. And down here in the States, I know that they've been implementing that and changing things as well, changing the work sites and the job sites and hiring more and including everyone. And I think a union, right? A union becomes more powerful when you have that adversity, when you have that diversity as well, right? Instead of just men.
And you have to think of, like, there's a lot of change. Like, I mean, your PPI, like your protective equipment, like it's not going to be the same for a man as it is for a woman. We even have there's only one union here across Canada that currently is doing this, but they actually have childcare for the parents. So for the union workers, so there's childcare provided for them, and it's not just for the women; it's the men as well. So it's for everyone, and there has to be those changes. We have to be mindful that yes, if a woman becomes pregnant or that she needs to take that time off, and know that she can come back to her job and it's still there and secure for her.
Exactly, she doesn't lose it.
Exactly. So it's just those sort of things that we, should be happening across the board, just right across the board for everyone, not just in the trades, but just right across the board in
Across
general.
the board, yeah.
Yeah.
So you've spoken, right, at the Canadian Embassy in Tokyo.
Yes.
What did it feel like to represent stolen sisters on foreign soil while their cases may remain unsolved at home?
It's interesting because when I was in Japan, I went with my husband and my son, and both are about 6 feet tall. My son is an adult now, and he's 28 years young. He's single, ladies. He always cringes whenever I do that. And it was just interesting to walk around in Japan. The sun goes down like about 6 o'clock. So it's dark, and women are walking around by themselves at night. And some of these areas that you're walking where the residential is just little tiny streets. Like, I wouldn't even call them streets, little back alleys. And it's dark and there's not well lighting, and they're walking from their jobs or to their homes, whatever. And I'm walking with my two guys beside me, and I'm kind of like, oh, thank goodness I got my guys with me, because that's a common occurrence if it was dark here. And I'm realizing they're not worried. Young girls, older women, they're walking by themselves. They're not worried. They're safe. No one's attacking them. No one's raping them. No one's murdering them. No one's taking them away. They're safe. Their children are going to school, on these bullet trains, and there's just these bullet trains that are just specifically for the children to go to school, where there's children here in Canada that are not getting educated. Everywhere we went, we could drink the water out of the taps, and it was delicious, where there are reservations here in Canada that don't have drinking water. These are just common things that are happening. And when I talked to the embassy, there was a lot of people from Japan, a lot of people from Canada. And I said, these are just luxuries here. These are luxuries where our Indigenous people are still suffering. And not just Indigenous people. I mean, human beings, like women in general. We're not the United States by any means, but, in Canada, we're pretty safe. We don't have, quite what might be happening. But of course, we don't have that population as well. But still, as a woman, I'm not just walking in the dead of night to, at whatever, 8, 9 o'clock and not be a little mindful of my surroundings and keys in my hand, So it was really eye-opening. And I think the Japanese people are very polite and kind and so gracious. And I think with my voice and who I am as a personality, I kind of put a little shock to them. But I did have a man that was First Nations that was there who came to talk to me afterwards. And, I said, I hope I did justice. And he says, I'm so glad that you spoke of the injustices that are going on in Canada. We need to be aware of what is going on. And he says, coming from me, it wouldn't help. But he says, because I'm here, I'm working in the embassy. It's political. There's things that go on. But he says, you just told them what it was, and no sugarcoating. And that's what we need to hear. And, I was very gracious for him to say that to me, because cultures can differ, and I may come across as very gruff or hard. And I just really was honored that he was able to say, and he just said, keep doing what you're doing, keep doing the fight. And hearing those words, that just lights my fire. It just keeps me going.
Keep fueling the fire, yeah?
Yeah.
That's powerful. Next question, right? You fund searches for missing women.
Mhm.
How many times have you had to deliver the news to family that nobody ever wants to hear? And how is it to sleep, or how does it affect you after that?
Well, honestly, the endowment fund that we have currently is in the raising money mode right now and the awareness mode. So we have not done any digs at this time, but we are in hopes to, in the next 5 years, start doing digs. We're just in the raising money aspect. It's not cheap to do a dig or a search. And so there's a lot of need for money. And it's been a slow process. It's been a long process, but it's, we started the endowment fund in 2017, and I just keep pushing it. Now, I have the idea that if once we do start doing searches and start utilizing that money for those purposes, it's going to be something that's going to be very emotional for me to know that finally something is being done. And maybe we won't get answers, but at least a family will know that someone tried.
Someone tried and someone cared.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
I think that's all
well,
that's all anybody wants is to be
yeah.
heard.
Now, Shawna, how much would you say, right, would a dig cost?
Well, just recently there was a dig at one of the in the last year in a province a couple's doors down and went in Manitoba at one of the dumps that were there, and they ended up finding two bodies. And it was done by the city, and it went into like I think it was over $40,000.
$40,000 for one dig.
Yeah,
But think of it. To me, there's no price tag, right? You're bringing home two people, right, that were
yeah.
missing. And
Yeah. And some digs won't be as extensive. I mean, that was a garbage dump. That's a lot of work, a lot of man hours. Some might be just searching fields, and I'm currently working with a few people right now where we are working on trying to get some resolve for for some murders that have not been solved, and as well as working on bringing these families together to hopefully get some answers. We also, one of the things that we do here in Canada, well, with the endowment fund is we also, if there's any Indigenous art, if people want, they can donate their Indigenous art that they don't want anymore to the endowment fund. We in turn keep the integrity and the value of the artist and the art, and then we sell it, and 100% of the proceeds goes back into the endowment fund. So instead of someone going ahead and dropping it off at the local secondhand store or whatever, or just not wanting it, it keeps the value and the integrity of the art, and it helps for a great cause.
yeah, so Shawna, if somebody wants to donate today to the endowment fund, where can they reach that? Where can they find that?
So they can go onto Facebook and go to the Every Woman Empowered Endowment Fund. And we have a link right there that you can go straight to the charity, and it will talk about the endowment fund, and you will get a tax receipt if you're in Canada. And if you're from the United States and you wish to donate, we would be honored. And just remember, your dollar is worth about $1.35, $1.40 here, so you get more bang for the buck. And every bit of it counts.
And that's the big thing, right? Every little bit helps.
Yeah.
Whether you can give a couple dollars, whether you
Yeah.
can give a couple $100, whatever you can give,
Yes.
right? Every little bit chips away at that, and every little bit helps.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
So,
And if anybody wants to reach out and ask more questions or anything like that, feel free. You can reach out on the Facebook, and I'll respond.
yeah, and Shawna's already said, right? She's an open book. Whether you have questions, whatever you want to talk about, Shawna is willing and able to engage and talk. And if you want to learn, she's even willing to we have the University of Alberta. The thing you're going to send me the link. I'm going to put up if people want to go on and
Great
do a
book,
class.
great podcast.
Yeah, it's powerful. It's powerful. So, Shawna, right? What's the one question Canadian politicians still refuse to answer honestly about MMIWG?
I think that action is being taken. They talk about it. They talk a lot about it, but action has not been taken. There's a lot of, we know politicians, they're great for the gift of gab and the bull. And unfortunately, you have to put your money where your mouth is, which is what I'm doing. And I need to see our politicians across Canada all rise and say, okay, enough is enough. We need to do this. It's everything's been put on the back burner, a lot of broken promises, a lot of, just trauma, injustice, whatever. Just stop. And let's do something about it. Enough is enough.
A lot of lip service, right, Shawna?
Yeah. It's too much lip service. I'm so tired of it.
And I think you guys are having that up there in Canada as well, in here in the States. We're so sick and tired of just every politician telling you what you want to hear,
Yes.
and then doing the total opposite or doing nothing, right? Because I had a lady on the other day, right, and that there's a referendum, right, in Alberta breaking away from Canada itself.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and again, if that isn't the people saying we've had enough, right?
Yes, and the crazy part about it is again, it's if one person, a politician, decided to step down, then you would see a whole different attitude come from the province. And it's probably the same in the United States. If one person stepped down, you would see a whole change in what is going on. And it's amazing how one person can have that much effect and power
on the whole system.
Yes, and not do incredible things with it.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know,
Powerful things.
what a
They have
gift
such
to have, right?
exactly. Yeah, and I think of that often, right? And you know, Shawna, we talk. You do union work. I do union work, right? And on the small scale of things, what we're able to do, right, with the voice that we have and the power, that we have, it's uplifting for so many. But you like you're saying, it's the Prime Minister in Canada or the President of the United States. You have this so much power and so much power to do great things. Why not? Why not do great things? It's
Exactly.
frustrating and so frustrating in that brings me to the next question, right? I know you teach resilience and healing, but who heals the healer when the inbox is full of fresh grief and fresh threats?
I have to say I've been very blessed with two incredible parents in my life, and they are no longer here on earth. They're up with the Creator, and I have to say they're the ones that taught me about forgiveness, about understanding, about love. And when things get rough and when things get tough, I just go back to those simple moments of being able to know that at the end of the day, I just keep doing me and try to be the best me possible. I am not going to be able to solve, the world tomorrow, but I am making a dent and I'm making an impact. And I know that there's going to be tough times and hard times, but I have my ancestors that are surrounding me with love. And I have a good support system, family support system. I have a strong faith. And I really truly believe that when I leave this earth, that I will have done good and that I will have made a difference. I may not be, a superstar. I may not be someone that has made huge strides, but I made this a better place for the next 7 generations.
You made it a better place and you've made a difference, right?
Yes. Yes.
That's the powerful thing of it. And that brings me to the next question, right? What's the hardest truth you've had to tell young Indigenous girls about the country they were born into?
To believe in themselves and be strong within themselves. I do a lot of different types of workshops. One of them is creating healthy boundaries, the power of no, self-love, forgiveness. And I really stress about the personal self-development and valuing ourselves, loving ourselves, and learn how to do it. So many of us cannot look in a mirror and look back at that reflection and say, I love you. You're incredible. You're beautiful. You are everything. And I really love dealing with the youth because if we can change that foundation that they're on, their house is going to be a strong built house. But if they have a poor foundation that they're trying to work from, that house is just going to fall apart every time. The
Every time,
windows,
yeah.
the bricks. And so I want to help build those foundations, and I want to instill the strength and the resilience that they need to see how incredible they are and value who they are and make a difference for themselves.
For themselves, yeah. And that's the big thing, right? In being able to look yourself in the mirror and love yourself, right?
Yeah,
Because I don't think anyone on this earth, right? I don't think you can truly show love to any other human being until you can love yourself first.
exactly. You nailed that one on the nose. Yeah.
Because once you start loving yourself first, I say it often, right? I went through some things in my life in September, and I did a deep dive into everything, and I had to look myself in the mirror, and I said to myself, I forgive you, but and I forgive others. But again, I tell this often, and people look at me when I say, hey, I found true love at 41, and they say, well, what do you mean? Who is she? Is she beautiful? What does she look like? And I say, no, I fell in love with myself. And that's where the true me, like taking my power back of being able to live my life now, the right way and the correct way instead of the past life, past way I was living life, which was wrong. And it's powerful when you can do that. It really is.
It is. And I've had people call me and crying and saying, thank you. Thank you. For the first time, I feel valued. I feel loved. And like, oh my goodness, it just gives me goosebumps to know that I've helped someone, help them, guide them, and it's an honor. And
Yeah,
our youth are they need this. They need to
definitely.
have that in their lives. I mean, we have we didn't have a lot of these tools and resources when I was growing up, and now we have so many available. It's like, let's empower our youth to be valued and loved and respected, you know?
And I think nowadays, right, the hard problem is with the youth coming up is that there's so much social media, right? There's so much that draws them, that drains them too, right? And I think so many kids are watching this social media, which is fake, and they want to emulate some of these people, and they think that's how life is going to be, and it's a fairy tale, and it's rosy, and everything's great. Well, I hate to break it to you, it's not.
No. No.
But I mean, I think social media is a tool that unfortunately is being used the wrong way by just about 99% of the population. People like you, Shawna, and that use it for the right purposes, like myself. Back in September, I was using it differently, but now I strictly use it for my podcast and my podcast only. My private life is my private life, and that's how I keep it. So I'm using it the right way. People used to often criticize me, right, Shawna, because I was truthful and honest on social media. I would be having a shit day and I would say it. People would call me up. Well, you really shouldn't post that. Are you okay? No, I'm not okay. Did you read the goddamn post? Obviously I'm not, because for me, social media is supposed to be the truth and it's supposed to be honest. You're supposed to be showing people what you're going through, not just vacations on the beach or vacations, on an airplane and everything's great. No, life isn't great all the time, but it's now being of a healthy mindset of making every day the best day possible.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
And it must be, so powerful for you to get those phone calls and so uplifting, right? To think to yourself like, hey, you're not, I know you said you're making dents, right? You're not making dents. You're changing lives over there, Shawna, and that's powerful. And you need to know that, right? Because that's one of the greatest things, to get these phone calls, to have these young girls, or young men calling you saying, hey, I love myself for the first time. I just found that at 41, right? I can imagine a young kid, a young teen finding themselves first. Powerful. Because, Shawna, think of how many people go through life and never love themselves.
Exactly.
Yeah. So the Every Woman Empowered Endowment Fund had unlimited resources tomorrow. What single initiative would you launch that would terrify the system that profit from Indigenous disappearance?
First thing I would do is put the efforts in for a huge search that would be just about not even a 20-minute drive from my home, into some fields where we had multiple women go missing in the 90s and 2000s. They were all women that had known each other. They had all worked together on the streets. And we feel quite a few of us feel that there's a serial killer that had taken these lives. And so for me, it would be taking that money and doing a huge search out in these farmlands and being able to find these bodies and connect all these families that have never been connected before, have never met each other, but all have daughters that went missing, and being able to just shake the boots and say, why did you not do this? When we knew, when this has been something that's been ongoing, why couldn't we do a police search? Why couldn't we get the government to put the funding in for this, that we did this and we, to get some answers, some resolve. If it was empty fields, fine, but at least we know. Then we could search somewhere else. That would be, man, would that be exciting to do. And I wouldn't need a whole lot of resources, it's about volunteer man hours and putting in the right people. But oh my goodness, that would be just
powerful.
Incredible.
Yeah. So what's one statistic, right, about MMIWG that keeps you awake at 3 a.m.? And why don't more Canadians lose sleep over it?
The Indigenous people are about the Indigenous women are about 4% of our Canadian population. We have population is close to about 2,500 murdered and or missing women and girls. And that's 4% of our population. So it's crazy. If you took, 4 people, 2 of them have been either murdered or missing. It's just ridiculous. It's ridiculous. And we're 4% of our Canadian population.
That must keep you up at night.
Yeah, it does.
Thinking of the young girls, that you may have spoken to, or you may be, speaking to in the future. It's tough, right? So when a young Métis woman, right, tells you she wants to follow your path,
Hmm.
What warning do you give her that no one gave you?
Ooh. Well, a lot of times because I am not full-blooded, the Métis people weren't actually recognized until the late 80s here in Canada.
80,
And pardon me?
1980?
Yeah, around then. Yes.
Yeah.
And so we weren't recognized as Indigenous. We weren't recognized as anything. Some of us were called half breeds, or we weren't recognized as an actual part of the Indigenous community till then. So you're valued. You're Indigenous. It doesn't. You don't have to be full blooded to be proud of your culture. You don't have to be full blooded to want to make a difference and do something that others aren't doing. I'm an Indigenous speaker. I speak on a variety of subjects. I never speak as a first person. I've never went to a residential school. I've never had, a family member murdered or missing. But I can talk about the injustices to it and what I'm personally doing about it and what I'm hoping to do to make a difference. I have been chastised by a very close friend that I had grown up with who chastised me over why did I get to speak at the, Canadian embassy in Japan? Like, what made me so special, and I'm not even full blooded. I am doing something. I am making a difference. I am taking a stand. Now, I don't have to be 100% to want to make a difference in this life and educate people. And I think, as anybody that's growing up, be proud of your heritage. For whatever reason in the past, people didn't want to say if they were Indigenous, or who cares? Be proud of who you are and stand strong and true to who you are. And I will keep doing my fight. And I don't care if I get a bunch of naysayers or people that say, oh, well, you're not full blooded. Who cares? I'm doing more than you are,
Exactly.
you
Yeah.
know?
And it's
Like,
often those, right, Shawna, those
yeah,
people with the loudest voice, the loudest critics, right? Those are the
exactly.
ones doing nothing, right? And
Yep.
and they're upset because you're out there, boots on the ground, right? Going to politicians, going overseas. You're the one speaking up and out, right?
Yes.
So maybe if they were speaking up and out, maybe they would have a platform as well. But they
Exactly.
want to criticize you because you're not 100% or you're
Right.
only half, right? And
Yep.
and my thing is I don't care if you're 1% or 100% Indigenous, or I don't care if you're Indigenous at all. If you take up the cause, it's right.
Exactly. Exactly.
Doesn't matter,
Exactly. No,
you
it
know?
doesn't. It
It
doesn't.
doesn't.
No, it's
And those
about
are the people that even a friend of yours, right, that are misguided and that aren't educated enough to know, because here you are, right, moving mountains to do what you do, and they're still criticizing you and coming at you. It's almost like you're supposed to be my friend.
yeah,
You're
well, they're
supposed to.
not they're not anymore. I
I was just going to ask
Yeah,
you
they're
that.
not
That was the next
anymore.
question.
No, I choose to have positive, and I choose to have my cheerleaders around me and support system around me. And if you can't, be there like I would for you, for me, then guess what? Sorry, you got to go.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Sean, two more questions before we end, right? So you have spoken internationally.
Yes.
What's the one thing that the world still gets dangerously wrong about Canada's treatment of Indigenous women?
I think the thing that they get wrong is that they don't know. They don't know. They don't take the time to learn. They don't take the time to listen. They don't take the time to educate, and they keep getting it wrong. They're surprised by it all. Stop being surprised. Stop being surprised. Educate yourself. And I thank those who do come to me and ask the questions, because it's usually after I've spoken, people will come up and they'll share their stories with me. And I love that. That's when I
Yeah.
get to truly connect and resonate with them and share with them and hear their stories and be able to help them on their journey. So, I think it's just that I'm very approachable. So come and talk to me, because I love that anybody that wants to learn and be educated. Thank you.
So 10 years from now, when another little girl asks who changed the game for her people, what do you want the history books to say about Shawna J?
My whole intention on this earth is to make a difference and to leave it a better place than I found it. As a young girl, my parents, we'd go out and go camping or whatever. And my mom and my dad always says, when you find something, you use something, You leave it better than how you found it. You leave it better than how you found it. So I'm going to say that she left it better than how she found it.
And how she found it. So, Shawna, you are not just an advocate. You are the drumbeat that refuses to be silenced. You are the fire that refuses to be extinguished. You are proof that one Métis woman with a broken heart and an unbreakable spirit can shake the foundation of a nation. Thank you for every search that's being funded, for every tear you turned into action, every young woman you told your life matters when the world screamed otherwise. May the ancestors walk beside you. May the 7 sacred teachings guide you, and may every missing sister finally rest in peace because you refuse to let them be forgotten. We see you. We stand with you. We are forever changed because of you. Shawna, from the bottom of our hearts, thank you.
Thank you, Jimmy.
Thank you.
And as you'd say in Cree, thank you. Hi, hi.
Thank you so much. And I had a little saying here. What does miigwech mean?
That's Michif, and it's again a hello. Thank you.
Thank you. And that's what I had, but I got a little scared because I couldn't pronounce it, so I left it out.
You did not
I
bat. You did not bat.
And again, before we end, right, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
And we're going to be sharing this. We're going to be blasting it out on the social media, so everyone be ready. And everybody get your pocketbooks ready or your wallets ready or your credit cards ready because we're going to be donating, and we're going to make sure we send a donation over as well. And I am so honored, Shawna, to have you on and sharing the message.
Well, thank you for making me cry, Jimmy. These are grateful tears.
Thank you so much, and I appreciate you coming on. And I would love to have you on in the future. I would love to have you on and keep educating people, right? And keep
Anytime.
sharing, and I appreciate it. And as I like to say, how I end my every podcast, peace and love, Uncle Jimmy out.